All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the InterDrone Podcast, your 30,000-foot view of the commercial drone industry. My name is CJ Smith, marketing manager with the InterDrone team. I'm joined today with Mike Pehel, the InterDrone chairman, and Kara Murphy. She is a remote pilot. She is a writer, an artist. She writes for DP Review as well as the InterDrone website. So thank you guys for being here on this lovely Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you for having me.
Coming in remotely. So we want to go through and talk about some of the stories from the week. There's obviously a lot of news that happens in this space, but we've picked out a couple stories we think are interesting that we want to talk through today. So we'll kick it off. DJI has been in the news. Well, they're always in the news a lot, but they've been in the news a lot the last couple of days. It's kind of a feel-good story here. They're donating 100 drones to U.S. public safety agencies for disaster relief. The article says that they've been a pioneer in the Drones for Good community, taking a leading role in working with public safety agencies to expand drone use cases. What are some of your guys' thoughts on DJI doing this? Is this, where do you see some of these drones being used? And do you think this is kind of a timely initiative just with the coronavirus going on?
Yeah, I would say absolutely. You've seen it happen in China and other countries where drones are flying around and warning people, to maintain social distance or go stay at home. So DJI is a leader in the space, and for them to pitch in and provide maybe even smaller public safety forces with these resources, I think it's a good move on their part.
Yeah, I know I missed the opportunity because I was talking with Romeo over email, just asking him how he was, doing a health check on our extended InterDrone family. And he had mentioned this project, getting it ready because he's the one that really handles these things. And I missed the opportunity to ask for details on it so the crowd control thing is one
we talked about that
case
last week.
Yeah, well, we talked about somebody kind of violating that, and
yeah,
but I'm curious if there's other COVID use cases, and there's the disinfectant spray, but that's a different kind of drone than the ones I think that are being sent out. We've heard about the temperature readings, which we're waiting to kind of like get more scientific data. Right. But is there just basic surveillance stuff that's helping police that I think might be kind of less sexy to talk about, but will kind of help for simple reason of not even just trying to mitigate crowds with the drone, but simply flying over parks and things like that to see how well people are adhering to an order. Something simple like that is something I think can be achieved with these drones. And also, I think it's just great whenever DJI has an excuse to give public safety organizations free drones, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to your point, I mean, they may not have, a whole kind of process in place for using them, but just getting the equipment there is kind of, maybe will give them that motivation to take that first step and start using these.
I've always seen drones as an excellent search and rescue tool as well. They can hone in a lot closer than a helicopter and access areas that helicopters can't. So, God forbid someone goes missing, you can deploy a drone and, using the proper thermal technology, hopefully locate someone, or even a missing pet, which is something my friend Matt Quinn did a while back. They found a missing dog using that technology. So something else to think about in this crisis as well.
Yeah, Alan Perlman brought up last week, some of the things that you run into that you don't expect even in a search and rescue operation, like, oh, I can't fly over that hill because now I'm out of line of sight, So search and rescue is one of, I think, the first kind of things in the emergency services space that became immediately apparent. It was their famous Texas equine search and rescue lawsuit from it was between Schulman's client, which was search and rescue, and I think the FAA, because the FAA tried to fine a person for trying to find a person with a drone. mind-blowing bureaucratic kind of hammer thing.
Yeah.
That just shows you how much the culture's changed, right?
Yeah.
When people get frustrated with the current state of regulation, like that's how draconian it was in the past.
Yeah. What comes to mind here is I read the statistic somewhere and I can't properly cite the source, but there are over 18,000 public safety agencies or even police force, including police in the United States. So in the future, how do we have kind of a uniform standard for deploying drones in a state of emergency too? That would be interesting to see. Because one of the biggest issues is too, and this came up with the Michigan Coalition of Drone Operators versus Genesee County. I'm going on a tangent here, but so a man was arrested for making a legal flight in a county park, but the local officer thought it was illegal, or he didn't like drones. The guy was arrested, his gear was confiscated. Charges ended up not being pressed, but they ended up getting Dean Greenwald, a top aviation lawyer, pro bono, and they defeated them. And the county was trying to override the state on what was acceptable. The state says that counties cannot enact their own drone legislation, and the county tried to argue. And in the end, the Michigan Coalition of Drone Operators won the case. But when you see a case like that come up, you think in the long term, how do we communicate to every public safety agency? What is legal? What is not? What do you do in emergency? What is the proper protocol?
Yeah, and that kind of goes into who owns the sky kind of arguments. And as much as there's been lots of talk about it, it's almost left up to the circumstance in a lot of cases. There's been arguments that I've heard that the FAA owns everything above the blade of grass on your lawn, which seems kind of ridiculous. But meanwhile, there are real estate schools that teach you incorrectly that your airspace rights extend up into the into space, from your lot, which clearly doesn't exist, because then how could commercial aircraft fly over my house? So, a lot of it is just, understanding. And because it's not terrestrial, where we kind of understand laws through human interaction, there's always going to be these kind of edge cases that come up in the news. And I think actually you're correct, Kara, that in the public safety space will be, it'll get a lot of leeway to experiment with things, but because of the nature of law enforcement and, other public safety agencies like fire and emergency services and so on, their relationship to civilians will kind of force conversations faster too. And that kind of goes even to just the crowd control thing. Is everybody happy about that? Me personally, I think there's better uses of drones. But I've seen a lot of people in our community be totally excited, like, hey, we're keeping people safe. Isn't that what we want?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think that brings up a really interesting point, right? So public safety may get the opportunities to try things first, and then even with the pandemic, they might even have more opportunity to kind of push those boundaries a little bit, or to try new things that maybe weren't fitting into the regulatory landscape previously. So we're looking at an article from Drone DJ, the new disinfecting drone to rid large indoor spaces of COVID-19. So I think we've seen this technology being used to, like we talked last week, a pandemic drone taking temperatures of large groups of people. We've seen, a drone with a lot of people staying indoors. Now we're actually seeing drones potentially disinfect, large indoor spaces. And the picture they show here is a basketball court. They say it can take, the drones can carry up to 10 liters of disinfectant, and the process lasts about 60 seconds. You guys have any kind of interesting thoughts on, and when we may see this, especially when it comes to restarting up sports leagues or stadiums or concert venues after this pandemic? Is this something we might see more of?
Well, I think this one is a real necessity is the mother of invention type of situation, because that drone to me, just eyeballing it, that looks like a crop spraying drone. So we're just reusing or repurposing a drone that's currently used in agriculture for the current moment. And once that use case is proven, which clearly you could get better coverage from the sky, more even coverage too, then I don't think we're going to see it go away. So I would expect this to kind of scale up and become part of the new normal as we, as a society, start to restructure our ideas of disease control.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's ever going to be the same. And it is, I can't think of a more efficient method to cover such a large space in such a short time and do it effectively and without disrupting too much the regular flow of things, like when the crowd arrives and when the team gets out there. So it'll be exciting to see, and also see like which people in our industry will, or which companies, leading companies, will take part in it as well. It's a possible new income stream for small businesses as well. If you think of smaller stadiums and smaller arenas,
right,
not just the major ones.
This could even be potentially used for large box retailers, right? Think about like walking into a Walmart. I mean, they may have some sort of procedure in place where they want to disinfect the store every month or something like that. You know, like, and to your point, life may never be completely as we were used to it before the pandemic. So we might start to see a lot of these types of kind of macro disinfecting initiatives.
Yeah, place like Costco, where there's rows and rows of shopping carts, or a major supermarket chain.
Yeah.
Probably not a drone, but maybe something up against the wall or on the ceiling that just sprays light layer of disinfectant down on the shopping cart. Yeah.
Yeah, you know, automated systems, right? So I forget who is it on our team, probably on the delegate acquisition side, because they haven't been to the show yet. You know, they're like, I didn't know a drone could be terrestrial, because somebody on the phone that they were talking with said that. And it's like, well, yeah, the term has become fluid, right? So when we talk of drones, there are people that are listening to this podcast right now that are freaking out we're not saying UAV, you know, or UAS, because the term drone got appropriated from the military use into the consumer kind of market that we dealt with, and then the commercial market grew up from. So, you know, it's just kind of interesting thinking in terms of automated systems. What CJ was saying, you know, would you use this type of drone for that? Actually, probably not. Kara's example is better, but it really does come down to the exact space you're dealing with. So if you're looking at a stadium, actually the drone is the better coverage, because it's not the ceiling, which is too far in that case, but it's actually the mid-range, which is necessary for that specific environment. And I think we'll find out more specific environments to use these in as time goes on.
Yeah. And it just quickly wrap up, in the article it mentions that with 60 seconds, if they spray a disinfecting chemical, but they can actually use high energy ultraviolet light, which takes about 5 minutes, but it's a
Non-toxic.
non-toxic, non-chemical solution.
Yeah, because I was thinking along those lines too, like, you know, some people are sensitive.
Right.
For me, for example, I don't really wear perfume because I get a little nauseous. And so at what point are some people who are more sensitive going to just feel uncomfortable? So I like your point, George.
Yeah.
Yeah, then there's also allergies. You know, exposure to chemicals, consistent cleaning chemicals can make you your allergic reaction kind of flare up on other things.
Give you a head.
Yeah, migraines.
You know, with crops, right? We spray for crops, but a lot of people, you know, there's been studies that come out saying it's not healthy, right? And it's hurting.
Well, it's the parts per million type of thing, you know. So you got to implement it sometimes, but the question is how much and how often. always.
All right.
Yeah.
Find the happy medium. So we're going to move on. Bring it back to DJI. So last week, there were a lot of rumors that they were completely shutting down U.S. operations. This was debunked, though spokespeople from DJI are confirming that there are large organizational changes. DJI had a pretty robust dealer network that it sounds like they are, from the looks of it, really cutting back on. There's some different kind of ideas as to how true and how much they're cutting back and what they may be doing instead. Some people have said that they've seen DJI start to do a lot more direct to consumer sales, building out kind of their point of purchase on their website. Have you guys observed any changes, or what have kind of you guys been hearing around the community?
Well, Drone DJ, who is usually just on top of their FCC filings, he's always the first to break it. He must have set up alerts. There is a Mavic 2 Air rumored to be released, I guess. I don't know when. Coronavirus has obviously disrupted the supply chain in China. And so who knows how long, we don't know how long people in the Shenzhen factory were away from working there. But, and I love DJI, I use their products. Brendan Schulman has been awesome with getting back to me with quotes, especially around remote ID and PRM. But I feel like they missed a few opportunities in 2019 to really have some new releases. And I remember keeping on top of it especially with DP Review, and saying, they haven't really released a major consumer drone since the Mavic 2 series, which was August 2018. And now it's not the time to really do that. I feel like they missed an opportunity in 2019. I was hoping for a Phantom 5 myself. People say it's canceled or it's not. No one knows, but they did stagnate a bit, especially with catering to the commercial pilots, who are they're big customers, because a lot of commercial pilots I know carry at least 3 or 4 drones in their arsenal, and they're always looking to upgrade the latest model if it offers something that can give them a competitive edge.
Sure. Yeah.
Those are my starting thoughts anyway.
Yeah. We kind of covered it last week, and we got to this place where it was probably a business decision that was long time coming, as far as scaling back on certain things that aren't driving the profits, like the dealer network. One of the things noted in the article is that most of the dealers are not internal DJI people; they're outside, vendors.
Yeah, authorized resellers. Yeah.
Yeah, and the quality control issue there is clear, and this might be actually the first step to developing that once the sky clears. A more direct to consumer, or at least DJI in the loop of the customer service, or it may not be. It may be a continued market dominance strategy where they don't really have the pressure to innovate. And to Kara's point, I think it was interesting watching 2019 and kind of like a communal realization that, oh my God, every 3 months or every 6 months, DJI isn't putting something out that makes me go, wow, they're 10 years ahead of where I thought we'd be. So, it might just be that we're reaching limits and on certain things. Like the Phantom 4, like the retread on that actually wasn't that negatively received, right? And that makes sense to me, because that airframe fit the job. It still does that job really well. And the improvements would be on the sensor side, not on the drone, because it has a certain level of stability, a certain kind of level of reliability, and a certain level of durability. And all those things make for a great drone, whereas the Mavic is also great, but for different use cases. And it's not necessarily the thing you want on a job site always.
Mhm.
Sometimes it is. It depends on the job, right? So I'd be interested in the Air 2 and what that product would try to accomplish, because it seemed like the SKUs were at a point cannibalizing each other.
Mhm.
And that's why you saw the Phantoms kind of fade to the back. But does that have to be the story going forward? I mean, they own the market. It might be helpful to have more SKUs.
I mean, I will just say, as someone who flies in congested urban environments and may have to take off from a narrow space, I like the fact that I can comfortably hand catch a Phantom. Really comfortably hand catch a Mavic too. I mean, attempted, but and I found that the Phantom is sturdier. The higher you ascend, the wind picks up a little bit, and I found that frame to be sturdier. But overall, again, no one anticipated 2020 was going to be like this. So, 2019 was slow. I mean, they released pretty much all consumer products. They tried to compete with GoPro, with their underwater camera. I don't know. I'm interested to see, once this is over, where they're going to go. And let's not forget that Otel is coming out with the Evo 2. I know they were going to release it, and then they had a few issues, so they're holding back. Skydio 2 was exciting. I wish they had found a way to put a 1-inch sensor, 20 megapixel camera on that. I think that would have really given them an advantage, given the autonomous technology that they developed around that drone. But who knows?
Yeah, and one of the cool things, if you follow the Skydio team, as they interact with kind of the dronerati on Twitter, they are very responsive to trying to find or stopgap solutions, and that's the kind of ingenuity, at least on the software side, that I think is interesting from the Skydio team. They did improve the product design on the 2, but I still look at that frame and it didn't reek of commercial usage to me, even though that was the pitch.
Yeah.
And also there's issues in the way that it operates with that autonomy that don't really make it good for commercial use. There have been some really interesting applications for search and rescue. Just to have a drone kind of eye in the sky as you're the person walking with it for a search and rescue mission is easy use case, and gets over that BV loss issue we were talking about before. Autel, I think they're very underrated for how sturdy their drones are. I think early on people would look at the frame and say, isn't that just a Phantom with orange paint? And that is a really poor assessment of that product.
Yeah.
And I think we have Douglas Spotted Eagle on next week or the week after.
Next week.
Yeah, he'll probably go into Autel a little bit and what he's used them for. But these are companies that it just doesn't feel like the level of innovation we've seen in the early days is being matched now. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. It just means that we're getting into the optimization phase on a lot of these things, and we're also reaching physical limits, which is good, because then we could focus on new type of innovations. And I think the next 5 years is going to be about sensors and what can we load on these things, and the battery life, how long we could fly, because when you extend the flight time, I was talking with somebody years ago about, once you get into an hour-long flight, you're in a different world. The piloting is different than these shorter missions. And then the last leg is data integration, because clearly, there's some great firms out there like Drone Deploy and Pix4D and so on that are handling this, or even 3DR with SiteScan. But it's not at the level of pervasiveness where drone is just an extra folder of data on our hard drives in whatever type of vertical you're in.
I'll say one last thing, just from an artist's perspective. DJI bought a majority stake in Hasselblad Camera,
right?
In the camera company. Now, I've never owned an actual Hasselblad camera, but the color profile, even in the older models, is phenomenal. I mean, it's just something incredible. And so DJI has only incorporated the color profile into the Mavic 2. That's it. And I even said something to Brendan on Facebook. I said, hey, in future models, because there's a lot of us out there that also want to take aerial photographs and do a lot of videography. And I said, you need to incorporate this. You acquired it, incorporate it into future models. And he said, oh, yeah, good suggestion. I'll let the team know. I mean, he's the right person to tell that to, but I'd like to see that as well. Might as well get the, maximize on your investment there.
Right. I mean, I work on a photo show too, and like that's a name.
Yeah.
There's people in the photo world that don't even know that DJI owns that now.
Yeah.
And I find that to be mind blowing. And that kind of goes to show they might have just bought it and said like, okay, we just need this piece for that. Keep doing your own thing.
Mhm.
I would hope that would not be the case, that there be some type of stuff crossed over the wall, but we'll see. Sometimes it takes time for cultures to really start to blend.
Yeah.
And it takes kind of some type of executive action or a manager being moved or removed to kind of actually get the ball rolling.
Well, if the rumors are true, then we may see something else in the future. If that article is valid at all about restructuring or layoffs. I hope that's not the case. So people I've worked with at DJI just on getting test products to write reviews for have always been nice and professional and just lovely people. So you only hope for the best.
Yeah, time will tell, right?
Yeah.
Mike, I have a quick question too about, you're talking about sensors that will be ripe for innovation in the next couple of years. Do you think flying beyond visual line of sight is waiting for the technology to mature, or waiting for policy and regulation and remote ID to mature, or a combination of both?
Regulation it's holding things back more than anything else.
Mhm.
I kind of lean on a quote from Ramon Roche from Drone Code, which is that everything that we're doing now was capable, or we were capable of 5 years ago. It really is about integration, about the human side of this thing, and just about connecting the dots between the various endpoints on whether it's, a construction firm where all their data is still in CSV files. That's not just a drone problem. That's actually a general digital transformation problem that every organization, especially at larger scale, if your business is functioning, why should you rewrite your entire database model for a drone? So as far as BVLOS, it's 100% regulation driven, not technology. In this, from the drone side, there is an infrastructure side that needs to be built out, and I guess you could call that a tech thing, but I would call it an infrastructure thing. Are we using 5G? Do we have remote ID in place? Or are we using 5G to track the drone with remote ID? How many drones are we tracking? Are we tracking all of them? Are we creating caveats for this? All this, if you create a holistic picture of the sky and you say 10% of the drones don't have to be in that picture, you're basically saying we don't have a full picture.
Yeah.
But the question that I think the community begs the FAA and regulatory bodies in general is, we've gone years now where we've talked about the threat that these things pose, and we haven't had an incident yet. I think the FAA and regulatory bodies, if for example the CDC or was as strict as the FAA, we would probably have less of an outbreak right now. So there's that consideration to kind of think about.
Mm-hmm. Safety first at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, guys, we have two small stories before we wrap up. So the FAA is currently investigating an unknown drone who was flying over Manhattan and playing on a loudspeaker that people should maintain at least 6 feet away from each other, maintain social distancing, stop the spread of the virus. The FAA does not know who was piloting the drone. They do not know if the pilot had was Part 107, was registered as a Part 107 pilot. And this drone was allegedly being flown by, they quote, drone task force, a volunteer task force from residents of New York City. So it sounds like they're their heads and their hearts are in the right places. Maybe legally not so much. It is illegal to fly drones generally over different parts of Manhattan. What are some of your guys' thoughts on when you hear this?
Well, I want to start off first. Before I got on this podcast with you, I was just reading through the commercial SUAS remote pilots Facebook group, and a prominent photographer, George Steinmetz, I believe. His gear was confiscated. He was documenting burials on Hart Island. So anyway, it's kind of a divisive debate because some people are saying he deserved it. He should know better. This guy has contributed many photos to National Geographic, New York Times. And so you have that on the one hand, and then on the other hand, prominent pilots in the group saying, well, this guy's the head of New York Police Department, reach out to him and advocate on George's behalf. So, but getting back to the volunteer task force, I mean, their hearts were in the right place, but they didn't run it by the New York Police Department. Right. The New York Police Department had no idea. And it was a nice thought, but they don't have the authority to do it either. So I think now it's being investigated. And I always say this is because the authorities are now embarrassed. Like the New York Police Department is saying, "Oh, well, they were caught flat-footed. Oh, we had no idea." And
yeah, they'll find a law to book you on at that point.
Yeah. Right.
But I guess let's just talk about this on a legal standpoint. Were they flying over people? Were they flying in controlled airspace? Was the flight itself legal, barring them shouting at people from the loudspeaker? And then secondly, it's an embarrassment on one level, but police officers could be embarrassed by a great many things that doesn't give them the authority to arrest somebody over it.
Yeah.
And on the social good side, I think that's kind of.
I don't think I'm trying to just from their perspective, that's how they think. I don't think it's right either. Just from a police officer's perspective, like, oh, we didn't know about this. That's all.
No. I mean, on the social good side, I'm finding it hard to not agree with the pilot, but I kind of disagree with the action that they took entirely. There are many other ways. To help out. And this almost feels like a trolling incident. If you truly did care, like maybe start sewing masks at home. Or donate some time to a food.
Or get up on a literal soapbox with a loudspeaker and tell people.
So, and that's my question here, though. How does this differ from that? Probably in the misrepresentation. Unless that person has an LLC called the Volunteer Drone Task Force, there's a bit of fraud going on here that I think really makes the incident a trolling incident. And if there was a social good component, that thing that's kind of making us all giggle right now is the thing that undermines the entire activity. And in that right, I think the authorities are probably most upset about that, and justifiably so.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have anything to add to that. Very thorough.
Right. Because, imagine this is 6 months ago and somebody was flying a drone and it just said, wash your hands. And, it's just telling you other kind of, random safety measures. We probably wouldn't think that that's really acceptable. And this, you know, so I can see how this is following that similar logic, and you have to draw the line somewhere. Basically.
Well, and I think people forget how strict it is in Manhattan. No matter what, there is a permanent TFR around First Lady Melania Trump's apartment in New York City. Permanent TFR, even now with everything going on. Because I've seen people in other groups like, why is there a TFR over this baseball stadium? No one's playing. And yeah, to an extent that's true. But in Manhattan, in New York City, first of all, more helicopters, I think, than any other city in the US. And so I've seen drone videos of, you know, downtown New York's empty streets, and I think, oh wow, that's probably illegal a lot of
right.
And so people don't realize that there are only a few areas in New York City proper that are legal to take off, and I would say mostly on the Brooklyn side.
Well, and even commercial airlines, I don't think they can fly directly over Manhattan. And, you know, I think they need to follow the rivers essentially.
Yeah. I usually fly into LaGuardia, but you're absolutely right. Like I think, or just like the northernmost tip of the city, in case anything were to go wrong.
Yeah, you don't fly over the financial district or Times Square.
I'm sorry, I have to give a shout out to Leslie, our conference producer, because you just said LaGuardia and I say LaGuardia because I'm from New York.
Right. I'm not a New Yorker, in my defense.
No, it's just funny because there's no W in that word, but
yeah,
it sounded LaGuardia.
LaGuardia. I'm sure LaGuardia is probably correct, and just excuse.
Well, it depends if he's from New York or not.
Yeah, I'm from New York.
I knew what you were saying. I knew what you were saying.
No, that makes sense.
So the flight was probably illegal, is what we're saying. That can almost be assumed.
All flights I've seen either documenting the vacant streets downtown or this volunteer task force, yes. And so that's why the FAA has decided to investigate.
Yeah, compliance is always the issue, though, you know, and I think that's why they want the pressure on remote ID.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting to me, though, what gets on the FAA's radar and what doesn't. I can't remember the name of the artist, but someone did take a video at night flying, and he even said it in his caption, like flying a Mavic 2 Air right over downtown Manhattan, right over cars. Like I think we passed the Empire State Building at some point in the video. It's still up there on Instagram, I think. And as far as I know, I haven't heard of the FAA investigating him. I mean, there's probably too many incidents for them to keep up with, but it's always interesting for me to see like who they crack down on.
Right. Who they want to make an example out of.
Yeah, who they want to make an example of, because they're not making an example of everyone. I'll say that.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a really good point. Yeah, these quiet streets make really cool kind of artistic opportunities for drone pilots to capture some really cool footage, but do your research and make sure you're doing it legally.
Streets are empty doesn't mean that you're in the right. Yeah,
right. Just because you're the only one there doesn't mean it's okay.
If a drone falls on an empty street.
There you go. You're right. Exactly.
Well, it was recorded. It's somewhere in that. Anyway, enough.
Well, guys, we just have two little stories before we wrap up, and we'll talk about the talk about some of the funding. So our friends at Drone Up, they have actually submitted a proposal to the Unicode Consortium for a drone emoji, and they're launching a petition for industry participation. So if anybody has been waiting for a drone emoji, you can support this cause. We will post the link to this petition in the description to the podcast. So wherever you're watching it, SoundCloud, YouTube, the InterDrone website, the InterDrone Launchpad, check the description below, and you can sign your name, and we can try to get that drone emoji into our phones as soon as possible.
Yeah, I think it's long overdue, because I have a helicopter emoji after my Twitter name, to show that an aerial perspective, but I won't set foot in a helicopter personally myself.
Right.
That's the closest thing I have to describe what I'm doing in emoji code. And yeah, I mean, drones started becoming commercial in 2013, so it's been 7 years now. I had thoughts on this. A friend of mine, Yiying Liu, she created the Twitter fail whale. I don't know if you guys remember being
Oh, yes.
way back
Wow.
in the day.
That was like every other day for a month at one point.
I remember being on Twitter when Kevin Rose and Barack Obama had the most followers, like, topping off at 1 million. And now it's like
Wow.
celebrities have taken over with that. But the fail whale used to appear when the system was overloaded. But anyhow, she created the dumpling emoji, the chopsticks emoji, and there were a few others because she's Chinese. So there were a few others. And I think, it's great to have a drone emoji, but I'd like to see one where a woman's catching a drone, where a man is, and there could be a few. I think we should start with one, but I definitely think it's something that.
So yeah, there's a couple of emojis that kind of do that, where there's the object and then there's the person interacting with the object, and those have different connotations.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just want to say, if this is Amy Weigand that did this, I think that's a genius marketing move. So credit to her.
Thank you, Drone Up.
I kind of want to bring an extra layer to this, because I've been, again, the Dronerati on Twitter. There's some people that are angry about this. Like, if this is what you're angry about today, maybe you need to get outside, take a walk.
Well, could I just say that I think for some people, being in quarantine has been difficult.
Yeah.
And I think it's made some people a little more tense when your life isn't following its natural rhythm. And some people are all alone in the quarantine. I'm lucky that I have my daughter and my family. We're all kind of quarantined. We're all kind of in this together, but it can be difficult for some people, and I think you lose perspective.
Yeah, one of the things with Twitter and social media in general is, you can get into a recursive feedback loop, and it's your own selection that got you there. But the system, it has its own gravity. It gets harder to get out, and especially if there's no other kind of framing reset for you. And we've been talking, I'm out on Long Island, and our SVP Johanna is up in Boston. We have access to cars if we want to escape the house and the people we're stuck here with. And that car is basically just a floating island of safeness. Whereas our friends like CJ and the conference producer Leslie, they're in the city. They're confined indoors a lot more. And, I'm waiting for the day when CJ stops making sense when we're in a meeting together. But, like, in all seriousness,
honestly, I thought that day already happened. But
but in all seriousness, I think it's important to just if you feel yourself going down that angry route, or even if you feel anxiety that you don't have control over the situation, because none of us do, and that seems overwhelming. There are places online to seek help, and that you should.
And I know, as someone who writes stuff that now gets a lot of traction, or even has with Drone Life, although Drone Life has closed comments, DP Review doesn't, I get my fair share of nasty comments. And but I try to think, though, it takes a lot of courage to create, whether you're writing a piece or producing a piece of art or doing anything. And so I always want to say, be the person who pushes something forward, like the drone emoji or whatever else it is you're working on. Don't be that person that tears other people down who are putting themselves out there. Like, you got to make a choice at some point in life. And it's easy to be critical, but it's much more difficult to create.
And I would say save the criticism for politicians, and
they deserve it. They chose that way.
Yeah, that's the job.
Yeah.
But everything else that has to do with human endeavor, we can criticize macro trends, like we see, we've had these conversations about what we don't like about Silicon Valley, and what we do like about, why we're conflicted about the things we don't like because of the great things it produces sometimes.
Yeah.
I think we all have to be in support of human endeavor, because that's what this industry is all about.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think now Now more than ever, just with the current climate, it's more important than ever to be supportive of everyone. So, well, guys, before we wrap up, we have 3 industry funding rounds that we want to announce. So on March 16th, a company called Avion raised $150,000. They are an autonomous aerial network which delivers medicals and vaccine supplies via drones. So a very timely capital raise for them. On the 31st of March, Copperstone Technologies raised an unknown amount. They help large mining companies manage liabilities and safety costs associated with their tailings ponds. And then just a few days ago on April 9th, Feds, which is Falcon Eye Drones, also raised an unknown amount, but they're a drone service company specialized in the Middle East region. So congratulations to those 3. And if anybody listening wants to either submit an industry round of capital raise or just view some of the different raises that have happened in the past months, you can head over to InterDrone.com and check out the funding rounds there. So I just want to thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you to our talented guests, Mr. Mike Pehel, the chairman of InterDrone, and Kara Murphy. You can read some of Kara's articles on InterDrone.com and on DP Review. And yeah, please subscribe, and we'll see you guys next week.
All right. Thank you for having me.
All right. See you later.
Take care.